I think I didn't do anything wrong. Just told the truth about how my husband could never measure up to my ex. But when he handed me those divorce papers, I realized maybe I'd underestimated him and overestimated how much I controlled the story. Looking back now, sitting in this empty apartment, with boxes of my remaining possessions scattered around me, I wonder when exactly everything started to unravel. Was it the first time I made a joke about Nathan's cooking in front of his parents? Or maybe it was when I started comparing him to Lucas at dinner parties, watching him shrink into himself while everyone else shifted uncomfortably in their seats? I suppose it doesn't matter now. The papers are signed. The custody arrangement is final. And Nathan has moved on with a dignity I never gave him credit for. But let me tell you how we got here. How a few harmless comments and some innocent reconnecting with an old flame somehow snowballed into losing everything I thought I controlled. The evening that started it all seemed innocent enough. We were hosting Nathan's parents, Doris and Graham, along with my mother Janet, for Ella's 7th birthday. The house was decorated with princess-themed balloons and streamers, and Nathan had spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen, determined to make Ella's cake from scratch instead of buying one from the bakery like I'd suggested. "Nathan's really going all out," my mother commented, watching through the kitchen doorway as my husband carefully piped pink frosting roses onto the chocolate cake. "Though I have to say, Perdita, remember how Lucas used to surprise you with those elaborate desserts? Now those were works of art." I laughed, perhaps a bit too loudly. "Oh, don't remind me. Lucas could have been a professional pastry chef. This is sweet, though. Nathan's really trying his best." Nathan's shoulders tensed slightly, but he continued his careful decorating. Doris, his mother, shot me a look I pretended not to notice. Graham cleared his throat and changed the subject to Ella's school performance, but the damage was done. The comparison hung in the air like smoke. When Nathan finally emerged with the finished cake, I couldn't help myself. "Well, it's definitely homemade," I said with a laugh. "Very rustic. Ella will love it, won't you, sweetheart?" Ella, perceptive as children often are, looked between her father's face and mine. "It's beautiful, Daddy," she said quietly, but I caught the confusion in her eyes. "It's perfectly fine," I continued, unable to stop myself. "I mean, we can't all be natural artists like some people. Nathan's more of a practical person. Aren't you, honey?" Nathan nodded slowly, that familiar resigned expression settling over his features. "Just wanted to make something special for Ella," he said softly. "And you did," I insisted, though my tone suggested otherwise. "It's very you," the party continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Doris and Graham exchanged worried glances throughout the evening, while my mother seemed oblivious to the tension, occasionally adding her own comments about how some men just have that natural flair and how everyone has different strengths. Nina, Nathan's younger sister, arrived late with a beautiful store-bought Princess Castle cake as a backup gift. "Just in case," she said, though her eyes lingered on my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Oh, how thoughtful," I said, though maybe unnecessary. Nathan worked so hard on his creation. The way I said creation made it sound like a child's art project. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just helped Ella blow out the candles on his carefully crafted cake. Later, as I was cleaning up, my phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. "Saw Ella's birthday photos on your mom's Facebook. Hope she had a great day. That cake looked interesting." Seh, I smiled, typing back quickly. "Nathan's handiwork. You know how it is. Remember the chocolate souffle I made for your 28th? Now that was a cake worthy of celebration." "Don't remind me," I replied, glancing toward the kitchen where Nathan was quietly loading the dishwasher. "Some of us peaked early, I guess." I thought I was being clever, maintaining this connection with Lucas while managing my current life. What I didn't realize was that Nathan had been standing in the doorway, having overheard my latest comment about his cake being interesting to my mother as she left. His expression was unreadable as he nodded goodnight and headed upstairs. I assumed it was his usual passive acceptance of my harmless teasing. I was wrong about a lot of things, but that assumption might have been the biggest mistake of all. 2 weeks later, we found ourselves at Marcello's, the Italian restaurant where our friend group gathered monthly. Nathan had made reservations, remembering it was my favorite spot, though I'd been dropping hints about wanting to try the new fusion place downtown. The kind of adventurous choice Lucas would have made without being asked. "Nathan's so thoughtful," said Sarah, one of our couple friends, as we settled into our usual corner booth. "Tom would have forgotten entirely and suggested we just order pizza." "Well, Nathan's definitely reliable," I said, scanning the menu I'd memorized months ago. Very predictable. You always know what you're getting. Nathan ordered his usual chicken parmesan, and I couldn't resist. See? Predictable. I turned to the group with an indulgent smile. 15 years together, and he's ordered the same dish every single time we've come here. Consistency isn't a bad thing, offered Mark, Tom's husband. But his tone was cautious. Oh, I'm not complaining, I said quickly. It's just funny how different people approach life, you know? Some people are adventurous, always trying new things, keeping life exciting. Others prefer their comfort zones. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages, but really scrolling to the photo Lucas had sent me earlier. Him at some trendy rooftop bar downtown, cocktail in hand, looking effortlessly sophisticated. The kind of place Nathan would never think to suggest. My ex, Lucas, was the complete opposite, I continued, unable to help myself. Every date was an adventure. New restaurants, spontaneous weekend trips, always pushing boundaries. Sometimes I wonder what that would be like again. The table fell silent. Sarah and Tom exchanged glances. Mark suddenly became very interested in his wine glass, and Nathan just continued eating his chicken parmesan, cutting each piece with mechanical precision. I mean, different approaches to life, right? I laughed, trying to lighten the mood I'd inadvertently created. Nathan's the steady one, the reliable provider. That's valuable too. Perdita, Sarah said gently. Maybe we should— Oh, I'm not being mean, I interrupted. I'm just being honest. Nathan knows who he is. Don't you, honey? Nathan looked up from his plate, nodded once, and returned to his meal. That nod, I interpreted it as agreement, as acknowledgement of his limitations. Now I realized it might have meant something entirely different. The evening deteriorated from there. I found myself telling the story of Lucas's surprise trip to Napa for my birthday years ago, contrasting it with Nathan's practical gift of a new vacuum cleaner last year. Useful, I emphasized. Very useful. That's Nathan in a nutshell. Doris, who had joined us later in the evening, listened to my stories with increasing discomfort. When I launched into an anecdote about Lucas's spontaneous decision to learn salsa dancing just to surprise me, she quietly excused herself and left early. Mom seemed upset, Nathan mentioned on the drive home. She's just tired, I said dismissively. Besides, she needs to understand that not everyone can be perfect like her precious son. Some of us have different experiences to draw from. Nathan was unusually quiet for the rest of the drive. When we got home, I noticed him checking his phone more frequently than usual, and when I asked about it, he just said he was catching up on work emails. The next morning, I discovered he'd changed the password on our joint bank account. When I asked about it, he said it was for security reasons, and that he'd give me the new password soon. I shrugged it off. Nathan was always paranoid about online security. What I didn't know was that he'd also started documenting things. Screenshots of my social media posts praising Lucas's old romantic gestures. Records of my comments at dinner parties. A pattern I was too self-absorbed to see, but one that Nathan, methodical, detail-oriented Nathan, was carefully cataloging. I thought I was just being honest about my feelings, sharing harmless observations about different personality types. I didn't realize I was building a case against myself, one comment at a time. The texting with Lucas had started innocently enough. Birthday wishes, holiday greetings, the occasional "how are you" check-in. But after that dinner at Marcelo's, something shifted. Maybe it was the way I'd felt defending my need for excitement, or maybe it was the way Nathan had just nodded and accepted my criticisms without fighting for our relationship. You deserve someone who appreciates your spirit, Lucas texted after I'd complained about Nathan's reaction to my suggestion that we take a spontaneous weekend trip. Some people just aren't built for adventure. We began meeting for coffee, ostensibly as old friends catching up. Lucas worked in marketing for a downtown firm, and his office was only a few blocks from mine. It was convenient, I told myself, harmless. You've lost that spark you used to have, he said during one of our cafe meetings. Remember how alive you were when we were together? Always up for anything? I did remember. I remembered feeling desired, appreciated, seen. With Lucas, I wasn't the nagging wife or the disappointed partner. I was the woman who deserved grand gestures and spontaneous adventures. The affair began gradually. A lingering hug goodbye, texts that grew more intimate. The first time he kissed me in his car outside my office building, I told myself it was just nostalgia, a moment of weakness, but it continued. Lunch hours extended into afternoon meetings at his apartment. I became an expert at crafting excuses, work emergencies, client meetings that ran late, mandatory training sessions that didn't exist. I feel terrible lying to Nathan, I confessed to Lucas one afternoon as we lay in his bed. You're not lying, he said, tracing patterns on my shoulder. You're protecting him from a truth that would hurt him unnecessarily. Besides, it's not like he's fighting for you. When was the last time he made you feel the way I do? He was right, I convinced myself. Nathan had become complacent, taking me for granted. If he cared more, if he tried harder, if he was more like Lucas, this wouldn't be happening. At home, I found myself increasingly critical of Nathan's efforts. When he brought me flowers from the grocery store, I mentioned how Lucas used to have bouquets delivered to my office. When Nathan suggested we watch a movie together, I compared it to the art gallery openings and wine tastings Lucas would plan. You're different lately, Nathan observed one evening. Distant. I'm fine, I said, not looking up from my phone where Lucas was texting about meeting tomorrow. Maybe I'm just tired of the same routine all the time, Nathan tried, in his quiet way. He researched new restaurants, suggested weekend activities, even bought tickets to a concert I'd mentioned wanting to see. But everything felt like too little, too late. Every gesture seemed forced compared to Lucas's natural charm and spontaneity. My mother, Janet, noticed the change in my mood during one of our weekly phone calls. You seem happier lately, she said. More like your old self. I've just been reconnecting with some old friends, I said carefully. It's nice to be around people who really get me, you know? That's wonderful, dear. Nathan's always been a bit limiting for someone with your personality. It's good that you're finding outlets. Her validation felt like permission. If my own mother could see that Nathan wasn't right for me, then surely I wasn't the villain in this story. What I didn't notice was how Nathan had started coming home at different times, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. How he'd begun asking casual questions about my day, my meetings, my schedule. How he'd started keeping his phone face down and password protected, just like I had. I was so focused on my secret life with Lucas that I missed the signs that Nathan might be developing some secrets of his own. The anonymous envelope arrived at my office on a Tuesday morning. Inside were printouts of text messages between Lucas and me, intimate messages, meeting arrangements, complaints about Nathan. My hands shook as I read through them, my own words looking ugly and damning in black and white. I immediately suspected a coworker, maybe someone who'd noticed my extended lunch breaks or overheard a phone conversation. I spent the day paranoid, wondering who might have been watching me, gathering evidence. It never occurred to me that quiet, predictable Nathan might be capable of such methodical surveillance. After all, he was just the reliable husband who accepted my criticisms with resigned nods. He couldn't possibly be playing a longer game than I was. But as I drove home that evening, the envelope burning like evidence on my passenger seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. The balance of power I thought I'd maintained was beginning to tip, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I was on the winning side. The school's annual fundraising dinner seemed like the perfect opportunity to reassert some control over my narrative. I'd been on edge since receiving that anonymous envelope, and Lucas had been increasingly distant, claiming he needed to be more careful about our meetings. I felt like I was losing my grip on both relationships, and that made me desperate to prove I was still the one calling the shots. Nathan had volunteered to help with the silent auction setup, spending his Saturday afternoon arranging displays and checking bid sheets with his typical methodical attention to detail. I watched him from across the gymnasium, chatting quietly with other parent volunteers, and felt a familiar surge of irritation at his contentment with such mundane tasks. Nathan's in his element, I said to a group of mothers near the refreshment table. Give him a spreadsheet and a clipboard, and he's happy as can be. Simple pleasures for simple people, right? A few women laughed politely, but I caught the uncomfortable glances they exchanged. Undeterred, I continued. I keep telling him he should branch out, try new things, but you know how some people are, creatures of habit. I gestured toward Nathan, who was now helping an elderly volunteer carry a heavy donation box. Very predictable. He seems sweet, offered Mrs. Pearson, Ella's teacher. Ella always talks about how her daddy helps with her homework and reads her stories. Oh, he's devoted to routine. I'll give him that, I said. Same bedtime stories, same weekend activities, same everything. I sometimes wonder what it would be like to be with someone more spontaneous. Someone who could surprise me. The conversation died an uncomfortable death, and I realized I'd gone too far. But instead of backing down, I felt compelled to justify myself. I mean, we all have different needs, right? Some people are content with this. I waved vaguely at the school gymnasium and its modest fundraising displays. Others need more stimulation, more excitement. It's not anyone's fault, just different personality types. Doris, who had been arranging flowers nearby, suddenly stood up and walked out of the gymnasium. Her face was flushed, and I could see her wiping her eyes as she pushed through the exit doors. Maybe you should go check on her, suggested another mother. But I shrugged. She's fine. She just gets emotional sometimes, probably overwhelmed by all the activity. What I didn't notice was Nina standing behind me, having heard most of my commentary. Nathan's sister had arrived late, still in her work clothes, and her expression was thunderous. Perdita, she said quietly, can I speak with you outside? I'm actually quite busy helping with now. Her tone brooked no argument. We walked outside, where Doris was sitting in her car, composing herself. What the hell is wrong with you? Nina's voice was low but furious. That man in there has spent 15 years loving you, supporting you, raising your daughter, and you stand there making jokes about him to strangers? They weren't jokes, I said defensively. I was just being honest about our differences. Nathan knows who he is. Nathan knows his wife is humiliating him in public, yes. He knows you compare him to other men in front of his family and friends. He knows you act like being married to him is some kind of burden you're nobly bearing. That's not. It is exactly what you're doing. And if you think he hasn't noticed, you're even more self-absorbed than I thought. She stalked back into the building, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot. Through the windows, I could see her approaching Nathan, speaking quietly to him, while gesturing toward the door. He looked in my direction, nodded, and continued his work. That nod again. I was beginning to hate that nod. When I returned home that evening, something felt different. The house was too quiet, too neat. I called out for Nathan, but got no response. Upstairs, I discovered that his closet was empty. His dresser drawers were cleared out. His toiletries were gone from the bathroom. On the kitchen table was a formal letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Dear Mrs. Vale, it began, we represent your husband, Nathan Vale, in the matter of dissolution of marriage. Please find enclosed the initial divorce petition and supporting documentation. We request that you retain legal counsel at your earliest convenience. Attached were copies of text messages between Lucas and me, screenshots of social media posts, a detailed timeline of my whereabouts over the past 3 months, bank records showing unexplained expenditures, photos of me entering and leaving Lucas's apartment building. My hands were shaking as I flipped through page after page of evidence. Nathan hadn't just been nodding and accepting my behavior, he'd been documenting it. Every cruel comment, every lie about working late, every moment I thought I was getting away with something. The methodical, detail-oriented man I'd dismissed as boring had built an airtight case against me while I was busy congratulating myself on my cleverness. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note in Nathan's careful script. I loved you enough to fight for our marriage. You loved someone else enough to destroy it. Ella deserves better than watching her mother disrespect her father. I won't subject any of us to this anymore. I sank into a kitchen chair, surrounded by the evidence of my own destruction, and realized that quiet, predictable Nathan had just played the most decisive move of his life. The law office of Henderson and Associates was nothing like I'd expected. I'd imagined some small, shabby practice that Nathan could afford on his IT manager salary. Instead, I found myself in a sleek downtown firm, with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive artwork on the walls. Mrs. Vale, said Patricia Henderson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, who looked like she'd never lost a case in her life. Thank you for coming in. I understand you've retained counsel? I had, though finding a lawyer willing to take my case had been more difficult than expected. Most had politely declined, after reviewing the evidence Nathan's team had provided. The one I'd finally hired, a young associate named David Chen, looked nervous as he arranged his files. Let's discuss the terms Mr. Vale is proposing, Henderson continued, sliding a thick document across the mahogany table. Primary custody of Ella, with supervised visitation for you initially. Division of assets based on marital contribution, with consideration for adultery as grounds for divorce. Spousal support limited to 2 years, with conditions. Supervised visitation? I sputtered. She's my daughter. Your daughter, who has been exhibiting signs of anxiety and behavioral issues at school, Henderson replied calmly. Issues that coincide with the deterioration of your marriage and your extracurricular activities. She opened another folder, revealing reports from Ella's teacher and school counselor. My 7-year-old had been acting out, having trouble concentrating, asking why mommy and daddy were always angry. The school had recommended family counseling. This is ridiculous, I said, turning to my lawyer. David, tell them this is ridiculous. David cleared his throat nervously. The evidence is extensive, Perdita. The documented pattern of adultery, the public humiliation, the deception. It's going to be difficult to counter. Henderson smiled coldly. Mr. Vale has been quite thorough. Phone records, GPS data from your vehicle, credit card statements, witness testimony from family and friends. He's also provided audio recordings. My blood ran cold. Audio recordings? She pressed play on a small device. My own voice filled the room, clear and damning. Nathan's more of a practical person. Some people just aren't built for adventure. I sometimes wonder what that would be like again. It was from the dinner at Marcello's, every cruel comparison I'd made, every dismissive comment about my husband. Nathan must have recorded it on his phone. There are several hours of similar recordings, Henderson continued. Family gatherings, social events, private conversations, a pattern of verbal abuse and emotional manipulation spanning months. I wasn't abusing anyone, I protested. I was just being honest about our relationship problems. You were systematically undermining your husband's self-worth while conducting an extramarital affair, Henderson corrected. The recordings make it clear that this wasn't a marriage in crisis. It was a marriage being deliberately sabotaged by one party. She produced another stack of documents. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals that coincided with my meetings with Lucas. Hotel receipts I'd forgotten about. Even a photo of Lucas and me kissing in his car, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. How did he get all this? I whispered. Mr. Vale is a professional in information technology, Henderson said. He has certain skills in data recovery and surveillance, all obtained legally, I assure you. Nothing was hacked or stolen, just carefully documented. The room was spinning. The quiet, boring husband I'd thought I was outsmarting had been running circles around me for months. What does he want? I asked weakly. Justice, said a familiar voice from the doorway. Nathan entered the conference room, looking more composed and confident than I'd seen him in years. He wore a well-tailored suit I didn't recognize, and carried himself with a dignity that made me realize how much I'd diminished him. Nathan, I started, but he held up a hand. I want primary custody of our daughter, he said calmly. I want a fair division of assets, minus what you spent on your affair. I want you to have the opportunity to rebuild a relationship with Ella, but only when you can do so without teaching her that it's acceptable to treat people the way you treated me. I never meant, you meant every word, he interrupted. Every comparison to Lucas, every public humiliation, every lie about working late. You meant all of it. The only thing you didn't mean was your wedding vows. I looked around the room desperately. We can work this out. We don't need lawyers. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Nathan shook his head. I spent months trying to fix this. I planned dates you criticized. I cooked meals you mocked. I tried to be more spontaneous, more exciting, more like Lucas. But nothing I did mattered, because you'd already decided I wasn't enough. That's not true. It's all true. And it's all documented. He gestured to the mountain of evidence on the table. I'm not angry anymore, Perdita. I'm just done. Henderson slid a pen across the table. Mrs. Vale, I strongly recommend you consider these terms carefully. If this goes to trial, the outcome will likely be far less favorable to you. I stared at the divorce papers, at the custody arrangement that would make me a weekend visitor in my daughter's life, at the financial settlement that would leave me starting over in a studio apartment. I need time to think, I said. You have 48 hours, Henderson replied. After that, we proceed to court. As I gathered my things with shaking hands, Nathan spoke one last time. I hope you find what you're looking for, Perdita. I really do. But you won't find it by tearing other people down. He nodded, that same nod I'd seen hundreds of times before, and left the room. But this time, I understood what it meant. It wasn't resignation or acceptance. It was closure. The courthouse was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. I sat beside David, my lawyer, watching Nathan and his legal team arrange their materials with practiced efficiency. The mountain of evidence against me had grown even larger in the weeks since our meeting. Apparently, more witnesses had come forward, More documentation had been uncovered. Judge Morrison was a stern woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen every variety of human failure cross her bench. She reviewed the case files with methodical attention, occasionally glancing up at Nathan and me with an expression that gave nothing away. "Mrs. Vale," she said finally, "I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. The documentation of adultery is extensive and undisputed. The pattern of emotional abuse toward your spouse is well documented through audio recordings and witness testimony. The impact on your minor child is evidenced by school reports and counselor recommendations." I tried to speak, but she continued. "Your husband has presented a compelling case for primary custody, supported by character witnesses, financial stability, and a demonstrated commitment to your daughter's well-being. Do you wish to contest these findings?" David had advised me not to fight it. The evidence was overwhelming, and a contested divorce would only make things worse for everyone, especially Ella. But sitting there, watching Nathan's family fill the benches behind him while my side remained mostly empty, I felt a desperate urge to explain myself. "Your Honor," I said, standing despite David's warning look, "I made mistakes, I know that, but I'm still Ella's mother. I love her more than anything. Loving someone and being capable of providing a stable environment for them are not the same thing," Judge Morrison replied. "Your actions over the past year demonstrate a pattern of poor judgment and destructive behavior. The court's primary concern is the welfare of the child." Behind Nathan, I could see Doris and Graham holding hands, their faces grave but resolute. Nina sat beside them, occasionally whispering something to Nathan's ear. On my side, only my mother Janet had come, and even she looked uncomfortable with the proceedings. "The court awards primary physical custody to Nathan Vale," Judge Morrison announced, "with supervised visitation for Perdita Vale, transitioning to standard visitation pending successful completion of family counseling and demonstrated stability." The words hit me like physical blows. Supervised visitation. My own daughter. And I'd need a court-appointed supervisor to spend time with her. "Asset division will reflect the marital contributions of both parties, with consideration for funds spent in furtherance of adultery," the judge continued. "Mrs. Vale, you are ordered to reimburse the marital estate for documented expenses related to your extramarital relationship." The final calculations were devastating. The house would be sold, with Nathan receiving the majority of proceeds, my retirement accounts, our savings, even my car. Everything was being divided according to a formula that accounted for my betrayal. Spousal support is awarded for 18 months, contingent upon Mrs. Vale's participation in counseling and adherence to the custody agreement, Judge Morrison concluded. Any violation of these terms will result in immediate termination of support and potential modification of visitation rights. As the judge's gavel fell, I felt the weight of my choices crushing down on me. Nathan turned to shake his lawyer's hand, accepting quiet congratulations from his family. He looked relieved, vindicated, free. Outside the courthouse, I tried one last time to reach him. "Nathan, please. Can we talk? Just for a minute?" He paused, considering, then nodded toward a quiet corner of the courthouse steps. His family waited at a respectful distance while we spoke. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it for the first time. "I'm sorry for all of it. The cheating, the humiliation, the way I treated you. You didn't deserve any of that." "No," he agreed quietly. "I didn't. I don't know why I did it. I felt trapped, I guess, like I was disappearing into this suburban life that wasn't really me. Lucas made me feel like the person I used to be." Nathan studied my face with an expression I couldn't read. "The person you used to be was someone who could love without conditions, someone who built people up instead of tearing them down. I fell in love with that person. She's still here," I said desperately. "I can change. I can be better." "Maybe you can," he said, "but not with me. We broke something that can't be fixed, Perdita. The best thing we can do now is try to minimize the damage to Ella." Ella, my 7-year-old daughter, who would grow up in a broken home because I couldn't appreciate what I had. "Will you tell her that I love her?" I asked, tears finally coming. "That none of this was her fault? She knows that," Nathan said gently, "and she'll always know it. Whatever else happened between us, you're still her mother. That won't change." He looked toward his family, then back at me. "I hope you find peace, Perdita. Real peace, not just the excitement you were chasing. Ella's going to need her mother to be healthy and whole." With that, he walked away, joining his parents and sister as they headed toward the parking garage. I watched them go, this family that had once been mine. that I'd thrown away for the illusion of something better. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. Heard about the divorce. Sorry it got so messy. Maybe we should keep some distance for a while until things settle down. I stared at the message, finally seeing it clearly. Lucas had never been the answer to my problems. He'd been an escape from facing them. All those comparisons I'd made, all those ways Nathan had supposedly failed to measure up, had been excuses to justify my own dissatisfaction with myself. 3 months later, I'm living in a one-bedroom apartment across town, working on rebuilding my relationship with my daughter through supervised visits and family therapy. Nathan was right. I needed to find peace, real peace, before I could be the mother Ella deserved. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent so much time criticizing Nathan's predictability, his contentment with simple pleasures, his quiet dignity. Now I'd give anything to have his steady presence back in my life. But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. I thought I was the one writing our story, controlling the narrative, keeping my options open. But Nathan, quiet, methodical Nathan, had been writing a different story altogether. One where actions had consequences, where evidence mattered more than excuses, and where a person's worth wasn't determined by how exciting or spontaneous they were, but by how they treated the people they claimed to love. He nodded that final time on the courthouse steps, the same nod I'd seen countless times before. But now I understood what it had always meant. Not resignation, not acceptance of my criticism, but a quiet recognition that some people reveal their true character through their choices. I made mine. He made his. And in